My name is Vanessa, and I'll never forget the night my own mother smirked across the dinner table and told me, "You'll always be the unsuccessful sister." It happened on one of those evenings where the house smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary. The table set with polished silverware, wine glasses filled to the brim. Everything looked perfect, like it always did when we had company over. But the performance wasn't for me. It never was. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're on the right side. Anyways, my sister Bianca was there, of course, glowing as she always seemed to. She had just finished telling everyone about her latest promotion at the firm, her fiancé beside her with a proud smile plastered across his face. The table hummed with admiration, our relatives nodding, clinking glasses, offering toast after toast. I sat quietly, my fork scraping against the plate, wondering if I should even try to add my own news to the mix. I had just accepted a new role at work, one that came with responsibility and a small team under me. It wasn't the glamorous, high-paying job Bianca bragged about, but it mattered to me. I had worked late nights for it, sacrificed weekends, poured myself into projects that no one else wanted to touch. And finally it had paid off. I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd be proud. So I spoke up. My voice was careful, but I smiled as I said, "I actually have something to share too. I got promoted last week. I'll be leading a new project." For a second, there was silence, a pause that might have been room for congratulations, but then my mother's lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one that never reached her eyes. She leaned back in her chair, her glass of wine catching the candlelight, and said, almost casually but sharp enough to cut me open, "You'll always be the unsuccessful sister." Laughter trickled around the table. A few relatives chuckled awkwardly, as though it were just another harmless joke. Bianca shook her head with a smile that said she wasn't going to argue with it. And my father? He just kept eating, eyes fixed on his plate, as though he hadn't heard anything at all. The words burned in my chest, settling deep into a place I thought I had outgrown. I forced myself to sit still, to swallow hard, to keep my face composed. But inside, it was like someone had poured acid on every accomplishment I had fought for. Years of working twice as hard, of trying to earn even a fraction of the praise Bianca received effortlessly, reduced to a single sentence. "You'll always be the unsuccessful sister." I smiled weakly, pretending it didn't matter, pretending I hadn't just been gutted in front of everyone. The conversation moved on, back to Bianca's wedding plans, back to her shiny life. No one asked about my project again. No one cared. That night, when I finally lay in bed, those words echoed over and over. I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit until then. It didn't matter what I achieved, what I built, what I became. To my mother, to my family, I would always be the shadow standing next to Bianca's light. But as I stared at the ceiling in the dark, a quiet resolve began to form beneath the hurt. If they were so sure I'd always be the unsuccessful sister, then I would prove them wrong. Not by begging for their approval, but by building a life so undeniable they'd choke on their own words. From the outside, we looked like the family everyone else wanted to be. Our house was neatly tucked into a quiet suburban street, with a manicured lawn, flower beds that bloomed in perfect rows, and windows that glowed warmly at night. Neighbors would wave and smile as we pulled into the driveway, remarking how lucky my parents were to have 2 beautiful daughters. Holiday photos always made the rounds. Christmas cards where we stood in matching outfits by the tree. Easter snapshots with painted eggs and pastel dresses. 4th of July barbecues with wide grins frozen in place. To anyone looking in, we were the picture of success, stability, and love. My parents loved that image. They polished it daily, feeding it to the community like it was proof that their lives were enviable. People would stop my mother in the grocery store to compliment her on how perfect her girls were. She'd smile, gracious and glowing, and say, "Thank you. They're everything we could ever ask for." I would stand there, groceries in hand, knowing she didn't mean me. She meant Bianca. She always meant Bianca. Behind closed doors, the reality was far different. The polished picture began to peel the second the door shut. Dinner wasn't about laughing together or sharing stories. It was about comparison. If I brought up something that happened at school, my mother would redirect the conversation to Bianca's latest achievement. If I shared good news about a project, my father would nod once and then ask Bianca about her internship, his eyes lighting up in a way they never did for me. Cruelty was woven into the fabric of our home, subtle enough that outsiders would never notice, sharp enough that it cut me daily. Bianca was praised for her slim figure, her elegance, her charm. I was told to watch my portions at dinner, or reminded that I wasn't as naturally graceful. My clothes were scrutinized, my hair critiqued, my every effort compared unfavorably to hers. Even my laugh was a target, too loud, too awkward, not nearly as sweet as Bianca's. The worst part was how normal it became. I learned to pose for the holiday photos, plastering on a smile that hid the truth. I learned to bite my tongue when relatives gushed about how proud my parents must be. I learned to keep my shoulders back, my expression neutral, as my mother gently reminded me in front of guests, "Don't slouch, Vanessa. Look more like your sister." In those moments, I became a background prop in their performance. Bianca was the star, the center of every spotlight, while I was the filler, there only to complete the illusion of a balanced, perfect family. My parents thrived on that illusion. They needed it, cherished it, protected it, but illusions crack. And every photo, every dinner, every forced smile only deepened the split inside me. Because I knew the truth. We weren't a perfect family. We were a stage play, and I had been cast as the shadow no one clapped for. Bianca was always the golden child, and the world seemed to agree. From the time we were little, people fawned over her. At family gatherings, relatives would line up just to tell her how beautiful she was, how much she resembled Mom, how she was destined for greatness. Even as children, the spotlight found her effortlessly. When she sang in the school choir, parents in the audience whispered about her talent. When she twirled in her Easter dress, people gasped at how angelic she looked. Meanwhile, I was there too, smiling, participating, trying my best. But my moments never seemed to matter. When I came home with a drawing that won a ribbon, my parents barely looked up. "That's nice, Vanessa," my mother said, before turning to ask Bianca about her spelling test. When I scored a goal in soccer, my father clapped politely, but then immediately bragged about Bianca being chosen for the dance recital solo. It didn't matter what I did. My victories were background noise, while Bianca's smallest efforts were symphonies. As we grew older, the gap only widened. Bianca's report cards were displayed proudly on the fridge, every A circled in red marker for emphasis. Mine were decent too, B's, a few A's, sometimes even better than hers. But no one cared enough to tape them up. At dinner, the conversation always revolved around her. Her grades, her friends, her plans. If I tried to add my own story, the attention would drift back to Bianca within minutes. Relatives were the worst. "Bianca is such a star," they'd gush at family reunions, pulling her close for hugs, telling her how proud they were. Then they'd glance at me with a polite smile and say, "And how are you doing, Vanessa?" before turning back to her. I was the afterthought, the placeholder, the second daughter no one bragged about. Even my parents' language told the story. My mother would say, "Bianca is destined for greatness," while I was steady or reliable. My father once introduced us to a neighbor by saying, "This is Bianca, our pride and joy, and this is Vanessa, our other daughter." The words stung, even though he probably thought nothing of them. To him, to them, Bianca was the headline, and I was the footnote. The cruelest part was that I tried. I tried to be worthy of the same pride. I studied hard, stayed out of trouble, worked quietly toward my own goals. I never demanded the spotlight, never wanted to take it from her. All I wanted was a fraction of the recognition they handed her without question. But no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't enough. I could hand them 1,000 small victories, but Bianca's single smile would eclipse them all. Living in her shadow became my normal. It shaped me, chipped away at me, made me believe I was destined to be second place in my own family. Bianca was the golden child, polished and adored. And me? I was the reminder that not every daughter was born to shine. The years of comparison blur together, but each memory leaves a scar that never quite fades. I can still picture the first time I brought home a report card with straight A's, clutching it tightly as though the paper itself could prove I was worth their pride. I handed it to my mother, my heart thudding with hope. She glanced at it, smiled faintly, and said, "That's good, Vanessa." But did you see Bianca's grades? She got the highest in her class. My accomplishment, which had felt so big in my small hands, instantly shrank into nothing. It wasn't just school. It was everything. When I won second place in a writing contest, my father looked at the certificate and said, "That's nice, but Bianca just got invited to perform at the recital next month." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. I wanted to scream that my achievement mattered too, that I had worked hard for it, but the words caught in my throat. Why bother? The script was already written. Bianca was the star, and I was the supporting act no one applauded. Even birthdays weren't safe. I remember turning 14, sitting at the kitchen table as relatives sang half-heartedly, a cake with my name scrawled across the top in icing. Midway through the celebration, someone brought up Bianca's upcoming Sweet 16, and suddenly all the attention shifted. The decorations, the plans, the big party, my birthday melted away as they gushed about hers. I sat quietly, the candles still flickering in front of me, wondering if anyone noticed I hadn't made a wish before blowing them out. The comparison seeped into the smallest corners of my life. At family gatherings, aunts would lean in and whisper to my mother, "Bianca is growing into such a beautiful young woman." Then they'd glance at me and add, "And Vanessa is sweet." Sweet. The word felt like a consolation prize, a way of saying I didn't measure up. My hair wasn't as shiny, my smile not as bright, my body not as slim. Bianca was elegant. I was nice. School events followed the same pattern. When I played in the band, my parents clapped politely, but their eyes lit up when Bianca walked across the stage for her awards. Afterward, they'd talk about how proud they were of her, how incredible she looked, how lucky they were to have her. I stopped mentioning my own achievements because why invite the inevitable reminder that I would always be less? The message was constant and clear. Bianca was the measure of success, and I was the reminder of what fell short. Every ignored report card, every dismissed award, every overshadowed birthday added to the pile of proof. Proof that in their eyes, I wasn't enough. And after years of hearing it, I started to believe it. I stopped looking for their approval, stopped expecting their pride. But deep down, the ache never went away. Because no matter how much I told myself it didn't matter, part of me still longed for the day someone might look at me and see more than less. The night is etched into me, as if it happened yesterday. We were seated around the long oak dining table, plates piled high with roasted vegetables and chicken, the kind of family dinner my parents loved to stage when relatives came over. Bianca sat across from me, her fiancé's arm draped casually over her chair, and as usual, the conversation had circled back to her. Her latest project at work, her wedding plans, her dress fittings. It was all Bianca, all the time. But that night, I had something to share too. For weeks, I had been pouring myself into a project at work, one that stretched me to my limits and made me prove myself in ways I hadn't thought possible. And finally, my boss had rewarded me with a new position, my first real step into leadership. I had kept the news quiet until then, wanting to tell my family in person, maybe hoping, foolishly, that this would be the moment I'd finally see pride in their eyes. So when the lull in conversation came, I cleared my throat, my palms damp against the linen napkin in my lap. "I actually have some news," I began, forcing a smile as all eyes turned toward me. "I've just been promoted. I'll be leading a new project with my own team." For half a second, there was silence. A pause where I thought, no, where I hoped applause or congratulations might follow. But then my mother leaned back in her chair, the faintest curl of a smirk on her lips. She raised her glass of wine and said, almost too casually, "You'll always be the unsuccessful sister." The words dropped like a stone into the middle of the table, and the ripples spread instantly. A couple of relatives chuckled, the kind of awkward laughter people give when they don't know what else to do. Bianca ducked her head with a smug little smile, her fiancé squeezing her hand. My father kept eating, his fork scraping against his plate, as though he hadn't heard anything at all. "And me?" I froze. The smile slipped off my face, my stomach twisting until the food in front of me might as well have been poison. I stared at my mother, trying to process what she had just said. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't sneered, she had smirked, her tone almost light, as if her words were nothing more than a clever observation. But that was the cruelty of it. She had taken the moment I had worked so hard for and reduced it to a punchline. I wanted to say something, anything to defend myself, to shout that I was successful, that I had fought for every inch of progress, that I was building a life I could be proud of. But the words caught in my throat. All I could feel was the weight of the room pressing down on me, the sting of betrayal sharper than any insult I had ever heard before. I laughed weakly, pretending it didn't matter, and the conversation moved on without me. But deep down, something cracked. For the first time, I understood with absolute clarity. No matter what I achieved, in her eyes, I would never be enough. And in that moment, I decided I didn't need her eyes anymore. The rest of that dinner blurred into noise, voices droning around me while my mother's words replayed in my head like an endless echo. "You'll always be the unsuccessful sister." At first, I did what I always did. Bit my tongue, forced a smile, told myself to swallow it down like I had 100 times before. But as I sat there, fork untouched, the weight of years pressed against my chest, and for once I couldn't silence it anymore. I thought about all the times I had fought for scraps of approval, the report cards I'd proudly held up only to be dismissed with a glance, the birthdays that had been overshadowed by Bianca's more important milestones, the countless jokes about me being second best, unremarkable, forgettable. Each memory stacked on top of the other, and suddenly I realized I was buried under them, suffocating. Something inside me shifted. It was quiet at first, a steady voice rising above the noise of the table, above the laughter and clinking glasses. The voice said, "This will never change." It didn't matter how many promotions I earned, how many hours I worked, how many achievements I stacked in front of them like proof. In their eyes, I would always be less beautiful, less worthy, less deserving of their pride. I looked across the table at Bianca, radiant as ever, her hand glittering with the engagement ring that my parents couldn't stop praising. She hadn't even said the cruel thing that night, but she didn't need to. She lived in the safety of being their golden child, the one who never had to prove anything, the one whose worth was assumed from birth. And me? I was the contrast they needed to keep her shining. Without me, she was just another daughter. With me, she was the special one. For the first time, I felt anger burn hotter than the hurt. I wasn't just sad anymore. I was done. Done performing for their approval. Done pretending their silence didn't hurt. Done waiting for them to clap for me when I succeeded. I realized I had been living my life in their script, always cast as the shadow, the supporting role, the backdrop to someone else's glory. But the script wasn't mine, and I didn't have to keep playing along. As dessert was served and conversation swirled around wedding plans, I sat back, tuning out every word. My mother's smirk still lingered in my mind, but instead of piercing me, it hardened into fuel. I knew, with absolute certainty, that no apology would come, no recognition would ever be given, and that was the breaking point. I couldn't change them, but I could change myself. That night, when I left the table and stepped into the cool air outside, I breathed differently. For years, I had walked away from their cruelty with tears in my eyes and the ache of defeat in my chest. But not this time. This time, I walked away knowing something powerful. I would never be enough for them, and that was no longer my problem. In the days after that dinner, something inside me settled into place. Not peace exactly, more like a decision. For years, I had tried to force their approval, tried to prove that I deserved a place at their table of pride. But the more I thought about my mother's words, the more I understood that nothing I did would ever be enough. And if that was true, why was I still breaking myself for scraps? So I didn't fight. I didn't slam doors or scream or write long messages demanding explanations. I had done all that before, and it never changed anything. This time, I chose silence, a quiet kind of rebellion that didn't ask for permission or forgiveness. I started with the group chat. The endless messages about wedding plans, family updates, and subtle jabs. Instead of forcing myself to respond, I let them scroll by unanswered. When my father called to ask if I was coming to Sunday dinner, I told him I was busy. When my mother texted with a list of errands she wanted me to run because Bianca was too busy, I left her on read. At first, it felt strange, even wrong. I had spent my whole life being available, bending to fill whatever role they shoved me into. To say nothing, to do nothing. It was like learning a new language. But with each ignored message, each missed dinner, each moment of silence, I felt the weight on my chest grow lighter. I didn't make a scene, but they noticed. My absence echoed louder than any argument could. At Bianca's next gathering, I wasn't there to set the table or take the pictures. At family brunch, my chair sat empty, my name missing from the conversation. My mother mentioned me once. In passing, her tone clipped. Vanessa thinks she's too busy for family these days. But there was something brittle in her voice, like she didn't quite believe her own dismissal. Walking away wasn't about punishing them. It was about saving myself. I realized I had been their scapegoat, the one they could diminish to make Bianca shine brighter, the one they could mock when they needed a laugh, the one they could ignore when they needed proof that not all children turn out special. I had been carrying that role for so long that I almost forgot I could set it down. But I could, and I did. The silence became a shield. Without constant exposure to their jabs, I had space to breathe, to hear my own thoughts. I didn't need to argue with them to prove I was worthy. I just needed to step away and stop playing the part they had written for me. For the first time, I wasn't begging for recognition or fighting to be seen. I was choosing myself. And though it hurt to let go of the hope that they might change, it hurt less than staying in a place that was never meant to honor me. My silence wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was my way of finally saying, enough.
When I stopped giving my family the power to define me, I suddenly had room to define myself. The silence I'd carved between us wasn't empty. It was space I had never been allowed before. And into that space, I began to build. Work became my first anchor. For years, I had treated my job as just another way to prove my worth to my parents, chasing promotions because I thought maybe if the title was impressive enough, they'd finally clap. But now, with their voices shut out, I started to see my work differently. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was investing in myself. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted, took risks that scared me, pitched ideas that had been sitting in my notebook for months. The more I poured into my career, the more it gave back. My confidence grew. My paychecks grew. And most importantly, my sense of independence grew. For the first time, I didn't measure my achievements by how my family would react. I measured them by how proud I felt. Then came my health. Not in the way my family always framed it, with snide comments about my weight or comparisons to Bianca's figure. This time, it wasn't about being thinner, prettier, or proving anything. It was about reclaiming my body from their ridicule. I joined a gym not to punish myself, but to see what strength felt like. I started cooking meals that nourished me, not meals that would please anyone else. Slowly, I felt energy return where exhaustion used to live. Each drop of sweat was like a quiet rebellion, proof that I belonged fully to myself. Friendships also deepened in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant drain of trying to win my family's approval, I had more to give to the people who actually cared. I laughed louder, listened better, and allowed myself to be vulnerable in ways I never could at home. Friends became family, the kind who celebrated my wins without comparison, who showed up when I was struggling, who saw me as more than a backdrop to someone else's story. And beneath it all, I nurtured my passions, the parts of myself I had buried for too long. I started writing again, filling journals with stories and reflections I had once been too afraid to share. I signed up for a photography class, not because it would impress anyone, but because capturing beauty made me feel alive. Piece by piece, I built a foundation of joy, independence, and purpose that had nothing to do with my mother's smirk or Bianca's spotlight. My family had no idea. They didn't ask, and I didn't offer. To them, I was probably still the unsuccessful sister, a shadow fading quietly from their world. But the truth was different. In the silence they mistook for weakness, I was building something stronger than they could ever imagine, a life that was mine, a path that belonged only to me. And for the first time, that was more than enough. The rise didn't come all at once. It wasn't a lottery ticket or a miracle. It was the result of every quiet step I had taken since the day I chose to walk away. At first, it was small wins, a project completed ahead of schedule, a colleague pulling me aside to say, "You're good at this, Vanessa. You should take the lead more often." Those small victories snowballed. My boss noticed. Then the higher-ups noticed, and soon I wasn't just the reliable employee in the background. I was being trusted with decisions, budgets, and teams. The promotion that once felt like a peak turned into a stepping stone. More came, one after another, until I wasn't just sitting in meetings, I was running them. I found myself being introduced to clients as the one who makes everything happen. For years I had been ignored, dismissed, called unsuccessful. But in boardrooms, people leaned in when I spoke. In offices across the city, my name carried weight. With the career growth came opportunities I had never imagined. A mentor encouraged me to invest some of my savings, to think bigger than just a paycheck. I took the risk, carefully at first, and then with more confidence as I learned. Side ventures turned into steady income. Stocks, partnerships, and even small business investments grew quietly behind the scenes. No flashy announcements, no desperate posts for approval, just steady, deliberate building. And then one day, I realized something that would have stunned my family if they had bothered to ask. I had built a fortune. Not billions, not celebrity status, but enough that I no longer had to worry about bills. Enough that I could make choices freely. Enough that I could look in the mirror and see independence reflected back at me. It wasn't luck. It was persistence, every late night, every risk, every refusal to quit when no one believed in me. The changes weren't just financial. They were visible in me. My friends noticed first. "You're glowing," one of them said one evening as we laughed over dinner. And it was true. My shoulders sat straighter, my laugh came easier, My presence filled the room in ways it never had before. Strangers smiled at me, sensing something in the way I carried myself. Confidence has a way of radiating outward, even when you don't realize it. For the first time, I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't desperate for someone to say I had finally measured up to Bianca. I didn't need their praise or recognition. The truth was, I had risen far beyond the limits they had set for me. I had built something real, something lasting, something that no smirk or insult could erase. The girl they had once dismissed as unsuccessful had become a woman whose success was undeniable, even if they never saw it. And in that realization, I felt something even more powerful than pride. I felt free. The first whisper came from an aunt over coffee. She leaned across the table, lowered her voice, and said, "Don't repeat this, but things with Bianca aren't as picture-perfect as she makes them look." At first, I brushed it off. My whole life, I had been told Bianca was untouchable, the golden child, flawless in every way. But then I started to hear it again, from different corners, until the whispers formed a pattern too clear to ignore. Apparently, the finances weren't adding up. The glamorous house Bianca and her husband had shown off at parties, it was hanging by the thread of a mortgage they couldn't afford. The luxury vacations she flaunted on social media, credit card debt piled behind the filtered sunsets. My parents had helped, of course, funneling money quietly to keep up the illusion, but even their resources were strained. Relatives began to notice, the cracks showing in ways Bianca couldn't filter out. Then came the stories about her marriage. At family events, Bianca still played the role of doting wife, her hand always resting perfectly on her husband's arm, their smiles rehearsed for every camera. But behind the scenes, arguments erupted. He stayed late at work more often, and not everyone believed it was just for overtime. Friends of friends whispered about shouting matches, slammed doors, tears hidden behind makeup. The kind of details people try to bury, but the truth has a way of leaking out. Even her reputation, once polished to a shine, began to wobble. Colleagues talked about missed deadlines, about how her charm no longer covered the fact that she wasn't delivering the way she used to. A cousin mentioned that people at her job had started rolling their eyes when her name came up. The golden glow that once blinded everyone was beginning to dim, and for the first time, people were willing to say it out loud. Hearing all of this stirred something complicated in me. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant. After all, wasn't this justice? For years, I had been cast as the shadow to her light, my worth diminished so hers could shine brighter. Now the cracks were showing, and the illusion was falling apart. But as I sat with it, the feeling wasn't triumph, it was recognition. Because I knew what it was like to live under unbearable pressure, to play a part that didn't feel real, to carry a role written for you by someone else. Still, the difference was undeniable. When I stumbled, no one offered me sympathy. When I succeeded, no one celebrated me. But when Bianca faltered, people rushed to cover it up, to excuse it, to protect the story of her perfection. Even as the illusion cracked, my parents doubled down, pretending nothing was wrong, desperate to keep the golden child's glow alive. But no illusion lasts forever. And while they scrambled to hold it together, I couldn't help but see the irony. For years, they had called me unsuccessful, and now, while they fought to protect her crumbling facade, I was quietly thriving, stronger than ever. The golden child's shine was fading, and mine had never been brighter. The call came late on a Tuesday evening, long after I had finished work and settled into the quiet comfort of my apartment. I stared at the screen for a moment, surprised to see my mother's name flash across it. She rarely called me directly. Texts, maybe, short and clipped, but a phone call was unusual. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice was unusually soft, almost rehearsed. "Vanessa, sweetheart," she began, her tone coated in sugar that didn't quite hide the sharp edges underneath. "How are you? We haven't spoken in a while." I almost laughed at that. A while? It had been months since the dinner where she called me the unsuccessful sister, months since I had chosen silence over begging, but now, suddenly, she remembered how to dial my number. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I waited. And that's when her tone shifted. The warmth cracked, revealing the real reason behind the call. She sighed heavily and said, "Things have been difficult lately. Your father and I, well, we're under a lot of financial strain. The wedding costs for Bianca, the house repairs, it's been overwhelming." She paused, as though waiting for me to volunteer. Before I could respond, she pressed on. "You've been doing well, haven't you? I mean, we've heard you got a promotion, and people say you're really making a name for yourself. We're so proud of you, Vanessa." The words felt hollow, as though they were coins she dropped into a jar she hoped I'd hand back to her in bills. Then came the real ask. "We could use a little help, just to get us through this rough patch. Maybe you could lend some money or use your connections to talk to someone on Bianca's behalf. She's been having trouble at work, and I know you'd want to support your sister." I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, the weight of her words heavy but not surprising. For years I had been invisible, dismissed, called less than. And now, suddenly, I was useful. Not because they valued me, not because they finally saw my worth, but because they needed something only I could provide. It struck me then how different the conversation would have been if the roles were reversed. If I had been the one struggling, no one would have called. No one would have softened their tone or offered false praise. They would have brushed me off, told me to tough it out, reminded me of my place as the unsuccessful sister. But now that their golden child's shine was dimming, now that their finances were crumbling, now that the illusion was slipping, they reached for me, the one they had cast aside. I didn't answer her request that night. I listened politely, murmured that I'd think about it, then ended the call. But as I set the phone down, a calm certainty filled me. They hadn't called out of love. They had called out of desperation. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to give them what they wanted. When the call came again the next evening, I knew I couldn't put it off forever. My mother's voice was sharper this time, the sweetness stripped away. "Vanessa," she said, "have you thought about what we discussed? We really need you right now." I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, paperwork scattered around, signs of the career they had once dismissed as nothing. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. For so many years, their words had left me stumbling, biting my tongue, swallowing the hurt just to keep peace. But I wasn't that girl anymore. "Yes, I've thought about it," I said evenly. My voice didn't shake. "And I need to say something before we go any further." There was silence on the other end. I imagined her sitting in the living room, wine glass in hand, expecting me to fall back into my old role, the one who always gave, always apologized, always absorbed the blows. But I didn't. "You told me I'd always be the unsuccessful sister," I began. The words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. "Do you remember that? At dinner, in front of everyone?" She stammered, caught off guard. "Vanessa, you're taking that out of context. It was just a joke." "No," I said firmly. "It wasn't a joke. It was the story you've told my whole life. That Bianca is the golden one, and I'm the one who never measures up. Every time I achieved something, it was dismissed. Every time I tried, it was overshadowed. You made sure I knew exactly where I stood. Her silence told me I'd struck the nerve she never wanted exposed. For the first time, I didn't let the silence scare me. I filled it. "I want you to look at me now," I said, my voice steady and calm. "I have built a career you don't even understand. I have opportunities, investments, friends who love me for who I am. I have more success than you ever believed I was capable of. And I did it all without your support, without your recognition, without your so-called guidance." On the other end, I heard a faint exhale. Maybe frustration, maybe guilt. But I didn't stop. "You only called me because you need something. You didn't call to ask how I was or to say you were proud. You didn't care until you realized I had something you wanted. And I refuse to go back to being the person you can mock and then lean on. I won't play that role anymore." My mother tried to interrupt, her voice rising. "Vanessa, this isn't fair." "It's the truth," I cut in. "You called me unsuccessful. But here's the reality. I've succeeded in building a life that no smirk or insult can take away. I don't need your approval anymore. And I will not save you from the consequences of how you've treated me." The line went quiet. For once, she had no words. I ended the call with a calmness I'd never felt before. For the first time, I had spoken my truth, and I knew she heard it. After that call, something inside me settled, like the last piece of a puzzle sliding into place. For so long, I had carried their words around like shackles, hearing my mother's smirk in my head every time I dared to dream. "You'll always be the unsuccessful sister." It had been a prophecy I thought I was doomed to fulfill, no matter how hard I tried. But now, standing in the life I had built with my own hands, I realized just how wrong they were. Success had always been their currency. In our house, it was measured in applause for Bianca, in titles, in appearances, in the way people gushed about her beauty or her charm. For me, there had never been enough. No award, no promotion, no effort could tip the scales in my favor. But the truth? Success was never about them. It was never about being good enough to earn their approval. It was about freedom. The freedom to wake up every morning and know I wasn't beholden to their judgments. The freedom to pay my own bills, to choose my own friends, to say no when someone tried to put me in a corner I didn't belong in. The freedom to walk away from cruelty and never look back. It was about strength. Not just the kind I found in the gym, though that mattered too. The quiet triumph of carrying myself taller, of feeling capable in my own body. But deeper strength. The kind that comes from surviving years of being told you're less and refusing to let it define you. The strength of holding my head high at work, of speaking ideas aloud and knowing they were worth hearing. The strength of saying no to my family's demands, not in anger, but in certainty. And most of all, it was about love. The love I had found in friendships that felt like family, in people who saw me as enough without conditions. The love I had finally started to feel for myself, something I never thought I would say. For years I thought self-love was a cliché, something people said but didn't mean. But slowly, through every risk I took, every victory I earned, every boundary I drew, I had learned to look in the mirror and see someone worthy. Bianca could keep her spotlight, her curated photos, her illusion of perfection. My parents could keep clinging to the idea that only one daughter was destined for greatness. None of that mattered anymore. Because success wasn't about their applause, it was about the life I built when no one was watching. I thought about the girl I used to be, sitting quietly at family dinners, waiting for someone to notice her, waiting for words of pride that never came. I wanted to reach back in time and tell her she didn't need them, that one day she'd stand in her own light, free, strong, and loved. They smirked at my failures, I smiled at my future, and my future won. Did you enjoy the story? If so, please let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to support us. Thanks for watching.